When I bought the land, all I wanted was quiet, 7 acres of open earth, tall pines whispering in the breeze, and the kind of silence you can only find when the nearest city lights are miles away. After 20 years in the military, deployments, noise, command chains, I was done following orders. I wanted space, peace, independence. The land sat just beyond the limits of Willow Glen Estates, a sprawling suburban maze of cookie-cutter houses, 3-car garages, and weekly lawn inspections. I knew about the HOA. I also knew the boundary line. My parcel wasn't in it, not legally, not technically, not by an inch. I thought that meant they'd leave me alone. I was wrong. It started with a woman in a mint green golf cart. She cruised by slowly, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, mouth puckered like she'd just tasted vinegar. She circled the property twice before parking at the edge of my drive. I was unloading lumber from the bed of my truck when she approached. "Excuse me," she called out, voice sharp enough to slice through drywall. "Are you planning to build that?" I looked back at the skeletal frame of my future barn. 4 walls of freshly erected beams, standing proud against the open sky. "Yep," I replied. "That's the idea." She stepped closer, heels crunching on gravel. "I'm Karen Aldridge. I'm the HOA chair for Willow Glen. You'll need to submit a building request form before you go any further." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "I'm not in the HOA," she blinked, as if I'd spoken in ancient Greek. "You're adjacent. That means your structures are subject to visual compliance under our covenants." I tilted my head. "Visual compliance? If it can be seen from Willow Glen," she said, pointing behind her. "It must meet our standards." I stared at her. "Lady, this isn't a gated kingdom. It's private land. Mine." Her lips thinned into a tight line. "That barn doesn't match the community aesthetic." I smiled. "Good." The next morning, a yellow envelope appeared. On my gate, sealed with HOA insignia and stuffed with rules, fines, and hollow threats. I tossed it in the burn barrel. A week later, I came home to find a city code officer parked on the roadside, clipboard in hand. "Routine inspection," he said vaguely, eyes scanning my half-finished barn. "Anonymous complaint about non-permitted construction." I handed him a copy of my permit, signed by the county clerk, and stamped with approval. "Nice try," I said, loud enough for the camera I'd just installed to catch it. That's when I knew Karen wasn't going to stop. Not because of rules, not because I'd done anything wrong, but because control wasn't something she liked to lose. And she had no control over me. I kept building. The more progress I made, the more aggressive she became. One morning, I found a row of makeshift, no trespassing, HOA property signs, staked along the outer edge of my land. Another time, my water delivery was mysteriously cancelled. The company said someone claiming to represent the neighborhood requested a safety pause. She was playing games. I documented everything. Every strange encounter, every letter, every incident. The more I ignored her, the more desperate she got. And as the barn took shape, so did the central conflict. Karen wasn't just angry that I existed outside her rules. She was furious that I didn't care about them. One night, I sat on my porch, watching the stars stretch across the sky like ribbons of fire. In the distance, I could see the twinkle of porch lights from Willow Glen. Orderly, uniform, tame. That's what Karen wanted from me. To fit, to comply, to surrender. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled to myself. She didn't realize it yet, but she'd picked the wrong neighbor to try and control. I hadn't come out here to start a war, but if she insisted on one, I'd build every inch of my life in defiance of her rules, and I'd win. By late spring, Karen had escalated from petty nuisance to full-blown crusader. Her new weapon, paperwork. She began flooding my mailbox with official-looking notices printed on HOA letterhead, warnings, friendly reminders, and citations for everything from excessive noise to visual disharmony. She even accused me of violating a landscaping ordinance by planting wildflowers along my fence. Wildflowers. I stopped opening them after the 10th envelope. But she wasn't just targeting me with mail. The HOA's hired landscapers started edging into my property line, claiming border maintenance. A drone hovered over my backyard one afternoon, buzzing low like a mechanical wasp before zipping back toward the identical beige rooftops of Willow Glen. Karen was probing every inch of my piece, testing for weakness. She found none. So she pushed harder. A county zoning officer knocked on my door 2 weeks later. We received several reports that you're running an unlicensed commercial operation here, he said, gesturing toward my livestock. 3 goats, 2 chickens, and a retired mule named Whiskey. They said you're operating a farm stand. That true? I held up my hands, palms bare. No farm stand, just a man feeding his animals. The officer looked embarrassed. Figured as much. But we had to check. The complaints were insistent. I nodded toward the HOA across the creek. Let me guess. Karen? Didn't say a name. But whoever it is has time and a fax machine. I offered him a cold bottle of water, and he left shaking his head, muttering about suburban drama. Karen's campaign wasn't working, and that made her dangerous. She wasn't used to resistance. She was used to neighbors folding at the first stern letter or veiled threat. But I wasn't in her neighborhood. I wasn't under her authority, and she hated it. Then came the incident with the dogs. One rainy Thursday morning, 2 animal control officers pulled into my driveway. They were polite but firm. We received a report of neglected and aggressive animals. Do you mind if we take a look? I didn't argue. I walked them to the shed where my dogs, 2 aging German Shepherd rescues, slept warm and dry with clean water, fresh hay, and food bowls full. The officers spent 15 minutes inspecting the place, patting the dogs, checking their tags. Everything. Looks great, one said. Honestly, one of the better setups we've seen. They left without filing a single note. But my patience was wearing thin. This wasn't oversight anymore. This was harassment. I installed motion-detecting cameras on my gate posts and placed a wireless trail cam in the tree line facing Willow Glen. Within days, I caught Karen's golf cart parked just off the easement, her phone raised toward my property. Like a sniper zeroing in, she was documenting everything, and she wasn't alone. One of my videos caught her showing up with a clipboard and a man in a tie, someone from the HOA board, I assumed. They pointed, took pictures, and walked back toward the neighborhood, shaking their heads like missionaries disappointed by sin. That's when I realized something important. Karen wasn't just obsessed with control. She was afraid of losing influence. 2. People like her, power isn't about rules. It's about perception, and my land, my presence, my refusal to bow. It made her look weak. I threatened the illusion she worked so hard to maintain. So, I started pushing back. I printed out every false complaint and every letter. I highlighted the ones that crossed legal lines. I wrote a formal report, gathered the video evidence, and filed a harassment complaint with the county mediator. I didn't expect immediate results, but I wanted a paper trail. Then I did something Karen didn't expect. I began building a privacy wall. 10 feet high, legal by county ordinance, fully permitted and reinforced. Not because I needed one. My nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, but because I could. The day the construction started, Karen stood at the edge of her lawn with binoculars and a folding chair, glaring like a dethroned empress watching her empire fall. By sunset, 4 concrete pillars stood tall, casting long shadows across the easement. It was the first time I saw real panic in her eyes. She knew the tide had shifted, and for the first time, she understood. She didn't control this narrative. She wasn't the authority here. She was just a neighbor, and a very loud one. If Karen's passive-aggressive campaign had been loud before, it turned deafening after the wall. She called the county again, this time to report an illegal barrier obstructing community sightlines. A zoning officer visited, reviewed my permits, and left with a shrug. "This is perfectly legal," he said, almost amused. "You even overbuilt the supports. That thing could survive a hurricane." Karen didn't take the news well. A day later, I received a letter not from the HOA, but from their attorney. The language was dramatic. "Your construction has caused emotional distress and devalued surrounding properties. We demand immediate removal or face litigation." I almost laughed. The wall wasn't even finished yet, but I took the letter seriously. I responded through my own lawyer, a friend from my military days, who now specialized in property disputes. His reply was short, calm, and lethal. "My client is not subject to HOA authority. Continued harassment or attempted legal action without jurisdiction will result in counterclaims, including defamation, trespassing, and malicious interference." Never heard from their lawyer again. But Karen, she doubled down. She hosted an emergency HOA meeting on her front lawn. Loudspeakers, lawn chairs, printed agendas. I watched from my porch as a crowd gathered, heads nodding, Karen pacing like a general on a battlefield. I couldn't hear her exact words, but I saw the gestures. She pointed at my wall, at my barn, at the faint silhouettes of my goats grazing beyond the tree line. It didn't matter that I wasn't part of their community. To her, I was an infection on her perfect little map. So, I made a decision. If she wanted to play games, I'd play one she couldn't win. I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled every parcel map and zoning file for the land around Willow Glen. It took hours, but what I found made me pause. A sliver of land, maybe 50 feet wide and several hundred feet long, ran between my property and the back edge of the HOA's common grounds. It was densely wooded, undeveloped, and forgotten. But it wasn't part of the HOA. It wasn't even part of Willow Glen's original plat. It was mine, tucked into the deed when I bought my land. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was just trees. But suddenly, it was a sword. That strip of forest formed the entire rear boundary of Willow Glen's recreational zone, clubhouse, tennis courts, jogging path, and a new playground Karen had just bragged about in their newsletter. Every bit of it now backed onto my land, and they'd been using it like it was theirs. The next morning, I walked that strip with a surveyor, marked the corners with bright flags, and posted laminated signs every 20 feet. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Landowner Jay Walker. Karen saw them by noon. She stormed down the access path behind the playground, sunglasses tilted down, fury in every step. "You can't do this," she hissed, pointing at a sign like it had insulted her personally. "This land belongs to the HOA. It always has." I handed her a copy of my deed. "Not anymore." She scanned the document with shaking hands, her eyes darting, trying to find a loophole, a mistake. something to claw her power back. There wasn't one. "You don't understand what you've done," she said through clenched teeth. "Oh, I do," I replied. "I've stopped playing defense." She stomped off without another word. 2 days later, I received an email from the HOA board, not Karen, from a different member. It was formal, apologetic, and offered to discuss a mutual easement agreement. Translation: "Please let us keep using your land." I didn't respond. Instead, I began clearing a trail of my own, right through the center of that wooded strip. I installed solar lights, built benches, put up a wooden sign that read, "Walker's Wild Grove, open weekends, free to the public." No HOA affiliation. I reached out to a local scout troop, a homeschool network, and a dog rescue group. Within 2 weekends, the trail was busy with life. Kids laughing, dogs running, people grilling hot dogs under a canopy of pines. From her porch, Karen could hear it all, and she couldn't stop any of it. Karen tried everything one last time. She filed a noise complaint, twice, claimed illegal events were happening on community-adjacent land, called animal control again, this time insisting my goats were aggressive and roaming. She even accused the kids from the scout troop of damaging HOA property with sidewalk chalk art on my picnic tables. Each time, the county dismissed her reports faster than the last. The paper trail was now so one-sided that the sheriff's office flagged her number. No neighborhood agitator. They called her in a memo I later obtained through public records. But the real blow came 2 weeks later, when a storm rolled in. Heavy winds knocked a diseased maple onto the Willow Glen clubhouse roof. It caved in half the structure. Their board voted to file an insurance claim the next morning, only to discover the fine print. Claim denied. Structure sits partially on unpermitted land, not owned or maintained by Willow Glen Estates. They'd been using my forest strip illegally for years. Now it was biting back. An emergency meeting followed, held in Karen's driveway again, but this time without the loudspeakers and smug confidence. I watched from my porch as tempers flared. Homeowners argued. One guy pointed toward my grove, shouting something about negligence and false authority. Another woman waved a file folder like a white flag. Karen just stood there, still as a statue, face drained of all color. She'd been queen of the HOA until her crown crumbled under the weight of a single fact. She had no power over me. I thought about walking down there, thought about saying something, but I didn't need to. My silence spoke loud enough. Instead, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and sat on my porch as the sun dipped behind the trees I now fully controlled. The next day, a different HOA board member, Jason, mid-30s, clearly fed up, approached my property with a small folder in hand. "Mr. Walker," he said, cautious. "On behalf of the board, we want to formally apologize." He handed me a printed letter, embossed and signed by 5 of the 7 HOA directors. Karen's name was notably missing. "In light of recent misunderstandings, we'd like to offer a revised easement agreement and a goodwill gesture for any inconvenience." Inside was a formal proposal, an annual payment for shared access to the back trail, liability waivers, and a pledge to cease all contact from the HOA unless legally required. I nodded as I read. "Smart move." Jason gave a small, grateful smile. "She's been removed from the board. Voted out last night. Unanimous." I wasn't surprised. HOA. Karen had been dethroned by her own castle. I signed the agreement, made a copy for my records, and added one last clause. Any future decisions impacting adjacent property owners must be reviewed in writing with at least 30 days' notice. They agreed. That was the end of it, for good. 2 months later, my wall was complete. The barn was painted red with white trim. My grove now had weekly visits from a local nature class, and a veterans group started holding monthly BBQs near the old trailhead. Life was calm again, peaceful, the way I wanted it. Karen? She still lived in Willow Glen, but her reign was over. Her name no longer appeared in the HOA newsletters, and the mint green golf cart disappeared from the streets. Neighbours stopped avoiding me. Some even stopped by. One afternoon, a woman from 3 doors down knocked on my gate. "I brought cookies," she said with a nervous smile. "For everything you went through." I thanked her. I didn't need revenge. I didn't want control. All I ever wanted was what I paid for, freedom, and I'd earned it. Not through noise, or war, or pettiness, but through boundaries. Lines that couldn't be moved, and the quiet strength of a man who knows exactly where he stands.